Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyday Bitcoin, which is a new Bitcoin podcast with your host, me, Keith Meola. This is a brand new Bitcoin podcast. As I have said, you may be thinking, well, there's already tons of Bitcoin podcasts. We don't need any more. But if you're thinking that, you would be wrong. There is always time, always a need for more Bitcoin podcasts. And I'm happy to say that this podcast will be different than most of the podcasts that are already on the airwaves, as if you would like to say, use an old school term. However, this is, like I said, a brand new podcast called Everyday Bitcoin, where I'll be covering the new everyday money standard that is Bitcoin. And I am coming at you today, recording the Genesis episode, episode 0, Genesis episode of Everyday Bitcoin on October 10th, 2025. Or if you want a different way to measure time, we are coming to you, or I am coming to you at Black Height 918,436. So, what exactly is this podcast? Or better yet, maybe I should start with what isn't this podcast? So, this podcast, Everyday Bitcoin, is not a place that will be focusing on price. It is not a podcast that will be focusing on the macro environments. It is not a podcast that will be focusing on paper Bitcoin companies, on treasury companies, pretty much on anything that has to do with Bitcoin adoption and Bitcoin's use as a medium of exchange. So, what is this podcast about? Well, like I just said, or like I alluded to, this podcast is a brand new podcast that is strictly focusing on Bitcoin's use as money, because that's what it is. Its use as the medium of exchange, and its use as not its use, but focusing on adoption. So how will the episodes be structured? Well, for the most part, I will be doing interviews with many people in the industry that are working on Bitcoin adoptions, pushing adoption, and ultimately focusing on the narrative of medium of exchange. Which brings me to why I started this podcast, because I am a consumer of the traditional Bitcoin podcast. I love Bitcoin podcasts. I think they're excellent. However, at the same time, I began to feel quite, I don't want to say jaded, but maybe a little bit jaded of the same old episodes. The same guests, which, are great. I very much enjoy listening to the same guests, but it just felt very repetitive. And I've only been listening to podcasts, or the Bitcoin podcast, for about 2 years. So maybe people that are much more seasoned, more veterans in the space than me will even feel more jaded than me. But nonetheless, I realized that, hey, while I love these podcasts, pretty much they're always the same guests talking about the same things, covering the same topics. And I wanted to create a new podcast. I thought there was a niche, a market to be explored that focused on these topics such as adoption and medium of exchange that are not normally covered by the bigger, more traditional, Bitcoin podcasts in the space. So I'll be shedding light and highlighting the happenings in the space that are less talked about. I'll be giving a platform to the lesser known people in the space, which I'm really excited to do. And for example, I'll be interviewing founders of some circular economies and Bitcoin communities around the world. I'll be interviewing people such as Meek from Geyser, to talk about Geyser and what is going on with that and how they're trying to push for adoption and obviously use Bitcoin as money. And I also have a lot of other guests in mind that are really not so much in the limelight, not talking about price, not talking about macro, not on podcasts, but that are equally important and that are doing a lot of work and really putting in, a lot of good energy and good effort into the space. But in addition to all the interview episodes, I also plan to do potentially, a weekly episode that will be more so of a news block, maybe about 10 minutes or so, just covering and highlighting all the news bits of adoption, of growing adoption, whether it be new companies that have allowed Bitcoin for purchases. I don't know exactly how I feel. I mean, I don't want to be talking about too much about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, or the SBR. But at the same time, I think it is important because it is a sign of adoption. So yes, a little bit of that. Obviously, nation state adoption is important, institution adoption is important, but I don't want to hyper focus more so on what that means for price. Oh, and while I don't want to focus on price, obviously, I do want to mention the current price is $118,968 US. I mentioned that because it is very indicative of worldwide adoption. However, we'll stop there at just the price. No price predictions, no reasonings or logic, or trying to figure out why the price is the price and where it may go from here. So, yes, that's that. A little debrief, a little intro into what the podcast will be. Very excited to get started. At first, will be audio only, and then eventually video, obviously. And then I really want to transition into Noster live streams. And having a live stream, maybe interacted with an audience, obviously, in the future, if more people want to listen. And that's that. Welcome to Everyday Bitcoin with me, Keith, and I'll be coming to you soon with the first episode. Thank you for listening. Bye.